In this tutorial, we're going to discuss the basics of using BSP brushes and how they help us with map creation. Alright, so let's go ahead and create a brand new level. And we're going to use a blank map as our template. Okay, and in a blank map, you're going to have basically just a void space with your blue grid and a red builder brush. So we get to start from scratch here. Now, the red builder brush, okay, is the brush that is used to create BSP geometry, okay, or a BSP brush. Now, a BSP brush is basically just a primitive, and you can see those represented here in our brushes section. So we have cubes, cones, we have a set of stairs, cylinders, sheets, tetrahedrons, and cards. Okay, now these brushes, if we left click on those, will change our builder brush. Now it's important to remember that the builder brush will not actually build anything. Okay, it's just kind of a placeholder of future brushes that will be built. Now in order to build brushes in our scene, we have to use the CSG operations. So we have to either add or subtract. So to kind of show how this is done, let's go ahead and left click on our cube brush, and then we're going to right click on it to modify its shape. So here I can access its properties and change its X, Y, and Z values, changing its overall size. So in my X, I'm going to type in 2048, and my Y 2048, and then in my Z I'm going to type 16. So I'm just building a very basic ground plane here. Now you'll notice at the bottom we have build. Okay, now what build is going to do is update any changes that you've made in your properties. Now notice if I type in 28 in my Z, it doesn't actually update until I hit enter or build. Okay, so let's change that back to 16 and hit enter, and it does the same thing. Now we have some other parameters here as well, and you can experiment with those and you will definitely see what those do. If you want to create an actual room with an interior, you can use hollow to do that, and then you can also control the wall thickness by changing that value. Let's go ahead and close this, and now what I want to do is I want to actually create the additive brush for my floor. So to do that, I'm going to go to CSG and use add. Now I can also hit Control A on my keyboard to add that as well. Alright, so now that we have our brush in here, you'll notice that we have our red builder brush, and it appears as though the red builder brush is part of this geometry, but it's not. It's important to remember that. Okay, it's just a placeholder for future brushes that will be created. So if I hit B on my keyboard, that red builder brush is going to be hidden. Now if I hit Alt X and I go to my orthographic views, my side, my front, and my top, you can see that a blue brush has been left behind. A blue brush is an additive brush. Okay. Now, later on in this course, you're going to see other colors for brushes. You're going to see yellow, which is going to be a subtractive brush, and then you're going to see green, which is a non-solid brush. Now, you'll also see the color teal in some of your objects, and that is going to represent static meshes. Alright, so now that we have this floor built, it's important to begin discussing units inside of Unreal and how we can get a sense of scale to begin building our environment. So, in Unreal, an Unreal unit is essentially 2 centimeters. Okay? 16 Unreal units is a foot. 96 units in Unreal is 6 feet tall, and that is the standard height for a character. Now, a standard wall size for residential homes is around 8 feet, and that's 128 Unreal units. So if you want a wall that is roughly about 16 feet tall, you want 256 units. If you want a wall that is 32 feet tall, you want 512 Unreal units. Okay, so you can kind of see the conversion. It might be a good idea to go ahead and take note of those units as we progress. Now, another great way to get a sense of scale inside of your level is to actually add in a character for human reference scale. So to do that, let's go to our content browser, and then in our search, we're going to type in Iron Guard, and then you want to make sure that you have your content folder selected under your packages, and then have skeletal mesh checked here. And you should be able to see that Iron Guard skeletal mesh. If you left click and drag that into the scene, onto your surface, you'll see that he drops in. Now one thing that I want you to notice is he's kind of halfway through. So we'll just drag him up in our Z direction using our move tool, and we can place him on the ground plane. Now hitting Alt X, let's go back to our orthographic views, and I want you to pay close attention to the additive brush and where it's located in space. If we take a look at this, you'll notice that our additive brush is not exactly on the grid. Its midpoint is right on this major line on the grid. Now what I want is this bottom line of my additive brush right on that grid. So what I need to do is I need to right click on one of these vertices, and that's going to change the pivot point of my move tool. So you'll see that that has snapped to this vertex point, and that it's also snapped this brush to the closest grid point. Alright, so once we've done that, we are ready to continue building our brushes. It's really important to remember to stay on the grid with all of your static meshes and with all of your BSP objects. Okay, it's going to make life so much easier once you start set dressing your level. Alright, so now that we have this built, let's build out just a simple room. So I'm going to right click on my cube. Okay, and that's going to bring up my properties, and I'm going to type in the value of 1024 by 1024 by 512. Okay, so I'm essentially going to be making a cube that is around 32 feet tall and 64 feet wide. Right? Okay, and then 64 feet in depth as well. Now, once I close this, my brush is missing. Okay, I don't see it anywhere. Well, we have to hit B on the keyboard to unhide that, and you'll see that our brush reappears. Now what we can do is we can go ahead and move our brush into position. So I'm going to put my brush right on top of my floor plane here. Okay, and I'm going to move it kind of off the grid there. I want it to be about 2 major grid spaces away from the edge along the back there. Now looking at my top view, I just want to make sure that that is centered up there. And that does look pretty good. Okay. Now looking at this, this is going to be a pretty square building, and I want it to be a little more rectangular. So I'm going to do something really quick. Let's modify our brush size. So I'm going to right click on this, and I'm going to change my X value to 512. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and bring that back up. So about 2 grid units, 2 major grid units. Okay, to this line right here. Excuse me, let's hit Control Z. So 2 major grid lines, I should say, not grid units. Okay, we're on the grid here. That looks good. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close this, and then we're going to add this geometry to our level. So let's use CSG Add or Control A, and that's going to add this box in here. And this is going to be just a pretty basic building. Now, if we hit B, remember we have our additive brush here. Now what I want to do at this point is I want to create an interior for this room. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and hit B to unhide my builder brush, and I'm going to select that builder brush, and we're going to modify its shape. Now a couple of ways that we can modify it is by right clicking and going to the properties, okay, which we can do, or we can go to the geometry mode, and that's Shift 2 on your keyboard for that keyboard shortcut. And notice what it does to our brush. It really enhances the size of our vertices, okay, which allows us to access the components of this brush. Now we can access the polygons or the faces of this brush, and we can also access the vertices of this brush. Now if you want to select the polygons of the brush, you need to select that surface in your perspective view, or if you want to select the vertices, you need to simply select them in the perspective view or in your side, top, or front view. Okay, so in my side view, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down Control and Alt, and then I'm going to left click and hold and drag, and that's going to allow me to use what's called a marquee selection around these vertices. So once I have those selected, I can go ahead and move those straight down. Now notice that my move tool is kind of off at this weird angle. That's because our reference coordinate system is set to local. Let's switch this to world, and then we could drop that straight down. Now I want to make sure that my grid units are set to 16 here because I want to create a wall thickness of 16. So I'm going to drop that down 1 grid unit, And let's hold Control Alt and left click and drag to select this vertex, or set of vertices, and we're going to move that one grid unit. Let's do the same thing here. I'm going to go ahead and drop that one grid unit. Okay, so now I also need to get the bottom. Now for the bottom here, I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to make this a little bit taller. So I'm going to go to this major grid line right here. And looking at that, I believe that's supposed to be 64 units from the bottom here to the top. So that's going to be a good value for us. Now looking at your front, you always want to make sure you check at least 2 orthographic views whenever working this way, because you can see here that my brush is still on the edge of that additive brush. So let's go ahead and Control Alt, left click and drag to select these vertices, and let's move that to the right one grid unit. Okay, just checking that, make sure that's right. Now another way that we can select vertices in our orthographic views, or actually select anything in our views, is to hold down Control, and let's try this one more time. Hold down Control, select that vertex, and then we can select this one, and then we can move that in. Okay, so Control clicking will allow you to select multiple objects and append multiple objects. Alright, so now that we have our brush set, let's go ahead and close this to exit out of that edit mode, and let's subtract from this room. Okay, so if we hit subtract, you'll notice that it doesn't really look like anything happened. Let's hit B on our keyboard, and that will hide our builder brush. Now notice that we have this yellow brush. That is a subtractive brush. So if we go into our perspective view and we go inside of our room, you'll notice that we have an interior, and we can now move around and run into this warehouse, or this building here. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to get in and we want to start working with a little bit more advanced topics in BSP creation. So in our next lesson, we're going to jump into that.